What if the Utah Jazz took all their cap space and went all in already this offseason? We're looking at it next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. Today on Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, we're going to look at if the Jazz took all their cap money, how much could they get, and went all in. What would that actually look like? Why would that be a good idea? Is it a good idea? And what could they actually get done? Then you can decide whether it's a good idea. Plus, late game watching extraordinaire stuff with the two games yesterday, Celtics and the Sixers and the Suns and the Nuggets. As I mentioned, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen. We are free and available on all podcasting apps. There's also a great YouTube community you can join. Just subscribe, follow, hit the bell button on YouTube so you get notified whenever we do a podcast. Thanks so much. And a tip of the hat to the everydayers. So glad to have you aboard and a part of this group. Thanks for kind of driving the train. All right, today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code Locked On. So I made the comment earlier this year that I think if you were to guess 26, 36, or 46, that 26 to me actually seems like the most likely scenario for the Jazz this offseason. I've gotten a lot of kickback on that from people, and been told that's probably not as likely as you would think. But maybe the other answer is that the Jazz actually go all in. They use their 30+ million of cap space. We'll discuss that in a second. They give up their draft pick that's top 10 protected to Oklahoma City. They then have cleared their requirements on draft picks, and they move on and can move forward. What is all in? So all in is that the Jazz currently have $30 million in cap space. If Talen Horton-Tucker opts out and he goes somewhere else, you have 41. If Jordan Clarkson opts out and goes somewhere else, then you can get up to about 40, maybe even $55 million worth of cap space. It's a lot. You don't have Talen Horton-Tucker and Jordan Clarkson. You have 3 first-round draft picks, which cut away your cap room a little bit. And I'll be perfectly honest, Dan Clayton and his crew over at Salt City Hoops is better at me at this than I am. And the new cap has me a little flustered right now. I don't quite get it. But the idea would be that you're actually going to go in and you're going to use your cap space. You're now functioning as an under-the-cap team. And if this collective bargaining agreement is the same as the past, if you're an under-the-cap team, then you don't get mid-level exception. If you sign your own free agents, they count against the cap. And there's really no way for the Jazz to actually not be an under-the-cap team this year with $30 million. So the first thing would be like, what does that get you? Well, it allows you to do 2 things. It allows you to go sign a free agent with the cap space that you can now far exceed the cap, the mid-level exception that most teams use to sign mid-level free agents or the such, and you actually can sign. You have much more money to sign. You can use your money to sign. The second thing it allows you to do is to trade players into that space. Now, somebody else who's over, you're gonna be taking in 30 to 50, sending back 15. They get a big trade exception. Okay, so those are the 2 ways you could acquire players with cap space. Is either free agency, signing someone in that space, or 2, that you are going to be able to do that. You're going to be able to trade into that space. So why would the Jazz go all in now? The answer would be, one, that you have your draft pick that's going to Oklahoma City. It's top 10 protected. And if you think Walker Kessler and Lauri Markkanen are actually pretty good already, and enough so that you're going to be such a good team that you're going to end up losing your pick at 12 or 13 anyway, you might as well go all in. The second thing in regards to acquiring talent is starting in 2025. So that's 2 years draft from now. You're beginning to get Cleveland and Minnesota's players as well as your own pick, and you're starting to compile and build and get more picks than you want. And that will be your pick / by which you're acquiring players. So we can have another discussion whether this is a good idea or not. I'm just trying to present this concept for everyone because this is one of the options. The interesting thing about going all in now would be what you really are deciding you're going to do is you have Lauri Markkanen, you have Walker Kessler, who are both, really good. Let's not get overly excited on Walker in the sense of like he's still super young. I do think he's really good. He does a lot of things well. I think you have established a center position. You know that he can give you. You should be able to build a defense to start around him, and that gives you. And then you have Lauri. And so now you're going to build around those two, and then you will have, let's say you use 2 of your first round draft picks. You will have 3 other young players in Ochai Agbaji and 2 first round draft picks this year, 9 and 16, and those players will be a part of your mix, but their time might get limited because you're really trying to win. So you have to be all right with that. That's part of all in. The second reason you would go all in now is you have a small window by which Lauri Markkanen's extension is not kicked in. Walker Kessler's still on a rookie deal. Markkanen is making, I think he'll be making $18 million at the end of his deal. When you sign him to his next deal, he's going to be making 40 or 50. And so you have a window by which your 2 best players are underpaid, and you can spend more money on other players without getting to the tax while you're in that window. And the third thing would be, and I don't know if you can do this, but if you could actually time this out in a fashion so that you suddenly acquire a bunch of players who have 2 years left on their deal, would be the thought. That you start in this 2-year window, 3-year window, Lowry's contract, before Lowry's contract kind of turns. And before you have to begin to start paying your plethora of rookies. If you can do that, then you actually have this window by which you have a 2 or 3 year window where you can fill in with players and you can try to win before these other players kick in with their money. It's a unique little window. And the only negative impact on that is I just think it means that your young players play less by definition. And the reason why I say by definition, even talking about Walker, I'm a little tentative. If we just look at the weekend, okay, Denver played Phoenix last night. Christian Braun played 8 minutes. Then I don't think another guy in Denver played with less than 7 years experience. Phoenix, despite a multitude of injuries, Jock Landale is the youngest player playing for them. He played professionally for many years. Then the next youngest player's probably got 5 or 6 years of experience. In the Boston-Philly game, Tyrese Maxey, who's in his 4th or 5th year, is the youngest player that played for them. And for Boston, Grant Williams in his 3rd or 4th year is the youngest player who's playing for them. You're just, in the Golden State Lakers, Moses Moody in his 3rd year got 20 minutes. And the Lakers are playing Lonnie Walker and Austin Reeves is like the stunner in this group in his 2nd year, who's getting time. And in Miami, New York, you have some Gabe Vincent, and you got my point. Young players don't play. Young players don't win. So that's why you would go all in. you have this weird time period where the contract of Lauri Markkanen is a 4-year, $67 million deal in which Markkanen's making 17.2 this year, 18 the year after, and by 2025-26, you're paying him a ton. Walker Kessler, you're paying $2 million, $3 million, then $5 million, and then probably in the realm of, well, he's restricted free agent, so as limited as 15, but probably a lot more. Ochai Agbaji is the same thing. So you have this 2-year window by which you're not paying your best players, and maybe you can fill in. So who in this year's market are those players that you might be able to play with for 2 years and suddenly acquire and see if you can build something around? We'll discuss that. Today's show is brought to you by Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross, also in Logan. The Chevy truck, there's just nothing better. There's nothing that signifies Americana more. There's nothing that signifies Utah more than the Murdochs. 80 plus years. That combination, the Americana of Chevy, the consistency and the loyalty of the Murdochs to Utah, that's the combination that drives Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross, also located in Logan. And the Chevy trucks, the Silverado and the Colorado, unprecedented. I don't need to tell you much about Chevy trucks. The name speaks for itself. The SUV lineup is underrated, with the Tahoe and the Suburban and the King Poobahs at the top, with working the tracks all the way down to the Blazer and the Trailblazer. It's all at Murdoch Hyundai. Actually, all at Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross, also in Logan. If you're going to stop by, free, please email me first at dlock09 so that we can give you your VIP experience. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. 100% deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. PrizePicks is easy to play, fun fantasy game for you. 2 to 6 players. You choose whether they go over or under. You're not playing against anyone else. You're not playing against computers. You're playing against the numbers that are out there, and you choose them. Safe and fast and easy withdrawals. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. So do it now. Download the PrizePicks app. Go to prizepicks.com. Sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks gives you $100. $72.50, $72.50, $50.50. You got it. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. It's every sport imaginable. It's fun. It's easy. It's no competing against other people. It just adds a little pizzazz to the night. So if Steph Curry's going to get 24 or more, you decide tonight. All at PrizePicks. Promo code Locked On. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. We'll kind of look at all week long, try to take a look at these kind of issues tomorrow. Can the Jazz do something to extend Lauri Markkanen? What about Taylor Horton-Tucker or Jordan Clarkson? Should the Jazz be looking at extensions for them? Is it a market where they can get extensions done, and what's the impact of that? So let's look at first the free agents. If you look at the biggest names and players available in free agents, Khris Middleton is probably the highest named available best player in free agency, at least the highest paid last year at he has a $40 million player option. So if he opts out, he's expecting to get over $40 million, or at least extended out 2 or 3 years. So suddenly you're 32-year-old Khris Middleton, probably longer, like if we're trying to play in what I would call this 2-year window before you're extending Markkanen, maybe you're willing to play a 3rd year in there. You're probably paying Khris Middleton probably 3 years, $120 million, using 30, depending if Clarkson is coming back or not. If Clarkson's coming back for anything more than 14, you don't have enough cap space. So if Clarkson's coming back at 18 or 19, you've now dug into your cap space. Taylor Horton-Tucker's not coming back. Maybe you have enough. You don't quite probably have enough to get to 40. You're going to have to try to maneuver some things. Does Kelly Olynyk come back? Some things that you don't really control a lot of these. So that's Khris Middleton, 32 years old, in the chat room in YouTube right now. Yes, would you be excited with a team that's relatively point guardless. Maybe you got Jordan Clarkson back, Khris Middleton, Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler as your starting five. Colin Sexton is your sixth man off the bench. Probably no Talen Horton-Tucker. Probably no Kelly Olynyk at that point. Is that all in? Get it done for you for the Jazz. Kristaps Porzingis would be a wild card here. He's coming off a really good year, so you're not getting a discount. He's at $36 million. He is only 28 years old. You're suddenly going with a Porzingis. By the way, Kelly Olynyk's opt-in date is prior to free agency, so you'd have to know you can sign these players before free agency. It does usually work that way that you do know, but that's just worth noting. Kristaps Porzingis, $36 million player option. He'd be opting out, so he's probably expecting a 3-year, $120 million, 4-year, $160 million deal, taking him to 32. Don't know what Washington's doing with that. Washington's in a little bit of a bind. We'll get to that in a second. Your front line would be Markkanen, Porzingis, Kessler. If you're able to hold on to Jordan, you're doing the same thing. Sexton off the bench. No Talen Horton-Tucker. No Kelly Olynyk. Do you like? Chat room. These are all in moves. This is using your cap space. The thing you have to be really careful of is when you suddenly don't use your cap space on something big like this, and you feel an urgency to use it because there is a real value to having player salaries on your books that you can then move for other pieces. You end up signing like 4 below average or average players, and it just becomes a quagmire. Fred VanVleet would be the next one. I'm not putting James Harden on the list. Fred VanVleet, the diminutive point guard out of Toronto. Undrafted, done amazing things. I believe he made about 21 this last year. He's a free agent. You would probably be signing him upwards in the 4-year, $120 million level, I would guess. Doesn't quite fit that timeline, but it gives you a point guard. You're now VanVleet. Can you keep Clarkson? Markkanen? Question mark. Kessler. Sexton off the bench. Does that move your meter? Portland is going to do everything it possibly can to keep Jerami Grant. But Jerami Grant's a nice player who is going to be highly sought after. He's a 6-foot whatever wing. Those guys are hard to find. They don't grow on trees. He's 29 years old. This is his big payday. I think he's going to get every ounce of everything he can. If Portland does not re-sign him, it's a huge pivot on their part. So I think he would be hard to get, which means you would have to pay him a number that is significant enough that Portland has to back out of the circumstance. He might be as expensive as Khris Middleton or Kristaps Porzingis in this market. Some of these projections are not my forte, but I think we're playing conceptual stuff. You have an idea of what's right or what's wrong here. Jerami Grant, I'll bet, is in the chat room is moving all your meters a little bit more, exciting you more than other possibilities. And it's interesting. Now but if I don't know, again, Jordan's awfully hard to keep on these circumstances. You're point guardless, and let's say you do keep Jordan, kind of the ideal circumstance, not totally sure that's possible. And Grant, and Markkanen, and Kessler. I'll bet you guys are thinking that one works. It's interesting. It's got some possibilities. That's probably being all in. If you do that, the next question gets to be, how many of your other assets are you willing to use and move to go solve the gaps in your roster? Because that's not a top 4. That team doesn't play right now. No point guard, Jordan Clarkson, Jerami Grant, Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler wins a lot of games. Does a lot of interesting things. Probably a pretty good team. Could be pretty good offensively with what Will did last year with his teams. With Lowry's efficiency, Walker's efficiency, Grant's pretty, you could be good. You've got other weaknesses, you don't, because you manage as an under-capped team, you don't have a lot of ways to go get them. Your bench would be Sexton, Abaji, and your 2 draft picks. You'd have to have some veterans, and you probably have to trade maybe one of those draft picks, or at least a future draft pick, to go try to fill your gap of who you're going to get. And what point guard is there out there that you're suddenly able to go get in some, manner that someone's going to make available, that someone needs to get off of. The other choice is trading for players. There's probably 6 players that come to mind that might be available from trades. I'll give you those 6 as we continue here, plus a late game watch and our lottery as we continue on Locked On Jazz. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Great conversation going on in the YouTube chat room. Thanks to all the everydayers that are in there. We'll continue a week-long of programming this week for you, checking out the various kind of cap options, roster building, as well as looking at some draft picks throughout the week. If the Jazz were to try to make an all-in trade, so now you're giving up assets, you're using your cap space to go acquire a player, the players that come to mind, again, there's some of these are hard to get done, no promise, I think you guys got it. Let's start with the Washington Wizards' Bradley Beal. Washington seems to me to still be at a little bit of a crossroads as a franchise. They have Kristaps as a free agent. They didn't make the playoffs. Not sure if they're rolling this back. Kyle Kuzma is a free agent. You have Bradley Beal sitting at a 5-year, $251 million contract. You would think at some point they're willing to get off Bradley Beal's contract. The question is going to be whether or not they believe getting off Bradley Beal's contract has value, or whether they're going to want a litany of draft picks. I personally think if you're willing to take 46.7, 50, 54, and 57 over the next 4 years, you shouldn't have to give up any assets at all. But the Jazz would have to decide. In our little thing we talked about, it would be that you have a 2-year window by which before you're paying your place, you would be paying Bradley Beal at 33, 53.6, and 57. Bradley Beal has been at times the best shooting guard in the NBA, and at other times and maybe it's the contract that has soured me, but just do not feel as though that there's a commitment of the level of and maybe it's because we haven't seen him do it long enough. Maybe this is all unfair. But is there a championship level player there who's played 57, 60, and 50 games the last 4 seasons? And when he was 25, he led the league in minutes played at 37. He averaged 26 points a game. And then he had back-to-back years of averaging 30. And then last year, just weirdness, only took 4 threes a game, played much more in the mid-range. Just some strange evolutions to his game, and that is a massive number. Everyone's favorite in Utah, Damian Lillard. Is Portland pivoting at some point? Lillard's putting the heat on him. I'm not here for a rebuild. Do they lose Jeremy Grant in free agency? Are they suddenly short guys? Are they suddenly in an Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe rebuild? $48 million, 45 next year, 48. It doesn't end there. 58 and 63 in the next 2 years. This is another player that does not fit in the idea that you're putting in for 2 years, then you pay Markkanen, then you're paying Kessler in 3, you're paying Abaji in 3, you're paying the next tier. Maybe it's a 3-year window. You go for it with whatever group you build right now. Not sure where you are on that. Trae Young in Atlanta has been criticized and ridiculed and blamed and become the one whose fault it is. And on the other end, he's the one who scores. And he's the one who carries them. And his defense is supposedly terrible. And he's 25. Now, this is not like you're playing for a 2-year window. This is you're building your pieces for the future, and you are now a Trae Young, Lowry, Markkanen, Walker, Kessler threesome with developing your picks along the way and filling in gaps. And they're going to want a lot of your cachet of picks if you're doing Trae Young. It's interesting. Trae Young has all sorts of flaws. No one without flaws is going to be made available for you. But Trae Young is a 30-point-a-game scorer in a league where offense matters. The teams that are going to be left here are all the best offensive teams. In a league in which maybe Walker Kessler can cover up Trae's defensive weaknesses, you then have your point guard. You have Ochai Agbaji as your 2, maybe a developing shooting guard that plays next to him. You have Sexton as your scorer off the bench. You have Lowry, Markkanen, Walker, Kessler. You try to find some other defensive wings around it that you can cover that up. Atlanta is going to rebuild this roster. Trae Young is not a 2-year window piece. This is actually, you're going to acquire one of those pieces. Chat room discuss on YouTube. Twitter, hit me on Twitter, DLock09 and discuss. Minnesota, Karl Anthony Towns. 36 next year, 50 the year after, 54 the year after that, 58 the year after that, and a player option for 62 5 years down the road. You're a pretty incredible offensive team in a league where offense wins. Cat playing your 4, you're playing Cat and Kessler with Markkanen. Your 3 7-footers, you're slow. 2 of them can shoot threes at the highest level. One of them's the best 3-point shooter in the league in a lot of ways, in Karl Anthony Towns. You're splitting your non-Walker Kessler minutes between Markkanen and Towns at center. And those are your 3 main pieces. And you're going to try to find some guards somewhere along the way. And the other one I'll throw out there is a wild card. If Denver loses, they've got to shake this thing up. They're going to want players for this. But I wonder if they would get off Michael Porter Jr. at 25 years old with all of his back injuries, 33, 35, 38, 40, 3 back surgeries, 25 years old. But can really play it. So those are some of the thoughts I have. If the Jazz were to go all in with their somewhere between $30 and $55 million of cap space, how many assets would you be willing to part? How far are you willing to go? What's the window? Or are you better off slow playing this and letting the market dictate when somebody massive becomes available? All right, late game watch. I have a ton of stuff I really want to get into, but let's get into it. So in Boston, Philly, I thought Joe Mazzulla had a really rough day. So in overtime, they were going at Brogdon and Horford in all actions, and he finally brings in Derek White, which I thought he was a little late to do. The other one I just thought is at 2:11 left in overtime, there's a Smith-Horford pick and roll. And there just should never be a smart Horford pick and roll. There should never be a smart Horford pick and roll when you have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown on the floor. There's 2:11 left in overtime. Every play should be Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. Turns into a turn. I just don't know why that would be run. They're running about 14 seconds off the clock on a bunch of plays in overtime to run picks and get matchups. And more often than not, they're ending up in a worse matchup that they started. Like Tobias Harris is who Boston was shooting after in most circumstances. And Harris starts on Tatum on a possession. They run a bunch of things. Then by the end, PJ Tucker's on him. Run your actions, which don't have any intention of scoring, or just trying to get matchups to get the right matchups. On the final play, I'm fine with not calling a timeout if you have the right personnel on the floor. But Malcolm Brogdon's a 44% three-point shooter in the regular season, a 50% three-point shooter in the playoffs. He is not on the floor in the final possession, you've got to call timeout and either take Marcus Smart or Derek White off the floor and put Malcolm Brogdon on the floor. I would suggest taking Marcus Smart off the floor because you're going to run the ball through Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, so you don't need Marcus Smart's ball handling. But I'm all for the non-timeout if you have the right guys on the floor, but Boston didn't have the right guys on the floor. And then the other one, frankly, is on the final play, it starts with 17.9. They're down 1. They don't run an action till 5 seconds or less. So they go 13 seconds to get themselves situated. You shouldn't be playing for the last shot. You're down 1. You need enough time for an offensive rebound anyway. And Brogdon should have been on the floor. You should have been coming out of a timeout to get an action. They failed. Now, out of a timeout, he likes to run those ISO things we talked about earlier last week, and they failed on both of those. So I can kind of get where suddenly they're going somewhere else, but they failed on both of these too. The other one is like you have Tatum guarded by Harris on that play. You bring up a pick, which slows things down and brings a double to the ball. I really thought Boston had a terrible overtime from a coaching X's and O standpoint. Hey, who am I to say? But I've also watched them all year. I have a little bit of an idea of what they're trying to do late in games, and I just explained to you why I think that. Like, so I'm not making this up. Oh, they were terrible. Like, there's things that just didn't vibe on how they were doing it. And then also, why was Marcus Smart guarding Joel Embiid on the inbound? It's a beautiful play that Philly went for 3. When you're down 2 and the shot clock's late or off, you should shoot a 3, particularly when Embiid's played 46 minutes and you don't want to play overtime. You have a better chance to win if you shoot the 3. But why is Marcus Smart guarding Joel Embiid on the inbound? Al Horford was just hovering on PJ Tucker, but I kind of want Al Horford guarding Joel Embiid, and then if I'm going to have someone hover, I got the idea, I like that, but I do Marcus Smart on PJ Tucker. Philadelphia's floor spacing is just horrendous right now when they run their Harden and Embiid stuff. They got guys standing shoulder to shoulder in the corners and not lifted. It's really weird. I will say this, I'm a little confused, and I think Boston's doing something to take this away. Philadelphia's go-to play late in the year was James Harden low right into a left-handed dribble to the middle off a 15-foot pick and roll with Joel Embiid, and then he would get to the middle. Embiid would then either pop to about 17 feet, mid-roll where he's really dangerous, or roll all the way to the basket and Harden would hit him. They haven't run that once in this entire playoffs, or at least that I've seen late. And I'm wondering, Boston must be doing something to take that away, because that was Philly's best play late in games this year. And I don't know why they're running Philly's running everything so high right now. Boston ran a neat play with a 1 minute left in regulation. It was a high horns where Brown had the ball. Smart and Tatum were at the elevated kind of elbows. Brogdon and Horford were in the corners, so good shooters. And they actually got a foul on PJ Tucker and never went back to that set, which I thought was weird. 1 minute left, go-to set. They never went back to it at any point. Definitely Philly was shooting after Brogdon, so you had to get Derek White in the game. I got that. But in that final play, what other notes do I have here? The other one, they seem to be switching Maxey onto Tatum was one of the things they were trying to get to when they already had Tobias Harris on Tatum. I'm not sure that I'm running a bunch of action to get that switch. Like, seems to, unless someone's got some numbers that are different than what I know, that seems immaterial and just working time. One of the key plays of the game, by the way, on the Marcus Smart, might have been end of regulation, Jaylen Brown doesn't stay spaced. And Tatum drives, and Brown comes in and takes away a passing lane for Tatum. And really, it's the end of regulation. And hurts, if he'd stayed spaced, he either gets the ball for a shot to win it, or it allows Tatum to do something. But Jaylen Brown did not stay spaced on that play. All right, so those are my thoughts on that game. Phoenix, Denver. I'm now late. Phoenix, I said this earlier on this late game, that Phoenix had a huge Chris Paul problem. Phoenix has solved its Chris Paul problem. Its Chris Paul problem was that Chris Paul needed to have the ball in his hands. The best play to run with Chris Paul is a DeAndre Ayton pick and roll. Otherwise, Devin Booker or Kevin Durant, they just switch it. So you're caught running DeAndre or Ayton, Chris Paul pick and rolls in the middle of the floor with Chris Paul not wanting to shoot, with teams face guarding Durant and Booker. And if you're the opponent, you love this because Booker and Durant aren't touching the ball. Now that problem is solved because Chris Paul's not playing. Phoenix, I love this. Monty Williams ran 2 plays late. He ran a Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, open side pick and roll. Meaning there's nobody in the corner. It's just those 2 guys playing. It can run into an ISO. It can run into a pick and roll. It can run into a drive. He ran that a ton. And they ran it beautifully. And then the second play they ran was Devin Booker coming off a double stagger of Durant and Ayton. Ayton rolls. He actually tries to hook to create an open 3 for TJ Ward on the far side, but got actually an easy layup out of it. Michael Porter Jr. is not the greatest defensive player, and so he doesn't rotate on one of them to Kevin Durant for an open 3 when Gordon came to help the drive by Booker. And then it's just those are the 2 plays they're running, and you couldn't be running those if Chris Paul were in the game. Michael Porter Jr.'s pull-up 3 at 121, 116 with 2:41 left was not a good shot. And interesting, with 41 seconds left Malone ran the exact same action he ran to get successfully and got a foul on Ayton out of a timeout where he brings a guy across the floor and Jokic gets it on a curl, but Jokic gets stood up, and then that's where Jokic turns it over and the game really ends. On that final play. But that's the exact same play that Malone ran. That's his go-to out-of-timeout play. All right, let's do our quick lottery. Wow, the show got really long today. Here we go. We're at 9. We're at 16. We're going to hold at 16. We're at 28. We're going to hold at 28. We have 1 in 5 chance. We didn't have any luck last week. The draft is Dallas gets the number 1 pick of the NBA draft. That would suck. Portland gets number 2. Oh my God, this is disastrous. 3, Washington. 4, Detroit tanks for 4th. Houston tanks for 5th. San Antonio tanks for 6th. Charlotte tanks for 7th. Ouch. Orlando 8, Indiana 9, Utah 10. This is the worst lottery I've seen yet. Dallas, Portland, Washington. Utah's at 10. Chicago, Oklahoma City, Toronto, New Orleans. Well, that's a depressing end of the show. Blah. Glad we got it out of the way. It doesn't happen in real life. Have a great one. Talk to you tomorrow.